All right. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Community Outreach Strategies for Historic Preservation Commissions and Boards, hosted by the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. I'm Marie Snyder, NAPC's Program Manager, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's webinar. I'd like to take a few moments to get you settled into the new webinar platform we're trying out. Much like other platforms, you have access to a Q&A and chat and polling function. You also have access to a handout function. These are located as tabs at the top right of your screen. If you'd like them to disappear, simply click the downward arrow at the upper right corner of your screen. To bring it back up, there will be a blue chat button at the bottom right-hand corner for you to click. To view presentations in full screen mode, hover over the presentation and click full. If you experience any technical issues, use the private chat function to send a message to the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. As a registrant, you will automatically receive access to the recording shortly after the webinar is completed. And now for the last of the housekeeping items. As you can see, continuing education credit instructions are listed on this opening slide. You can also find these instructions on the sticky message at the top of the chat tab. We've set aside time at the end of this presentation for Q&A. We will get to questions as time allows. To ask a question, please use the Q&A function and try to include the name of the presenter you'd like to respond first. If someone else asks a question you'd like to hear the answer to, give their question a thumbs up or upvote, and it will move toward the top of the list. Now for the presentation. I am joined by a talented panel of presenters, and let me show you their faces. Chris Skelly is Director of Local Government Programs at the Massachusetts Historical Commission. Adrian Scott Fine is a Senior Director of Advocacy at the Los Angeles Conservancy, and Lauren Hoogkamer is Assistant Historic Preservation Officer for the City of Tacoma. Chris, Adrian, and Lauren are also trainers for NAPC's Commission Assistance and Mentoring Program, also known as CAMP. You can find their bios and contact information in the Handouts tab. To get things started, Lauren has asked to run 3 quick polls that will tie in later to her portion of the presentation. Please take a moment to answer the following poll questions. And while you're answering those questions, Chris Skelly will get set up. He will be the first of the panelists to present today. And Chris, I can see your presentation now, just so you know. We are on the 3rd and final poll. All right, Chris, I think it is safe to go ahead and get started with your portion of the presentation.
All right, Marie, thank you. So you can hear me okay, Marie?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I was on mute. You sound great.
Okay, great. Excellent, great, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I'm gonna start off with a presentation of outreach and community engagement. And I'll just start by just want to say thank you for serving on your Preservation Commission. So I've just finished up my job at the State Historic Preservation Office, but I've worked at Mass Historical Commission for 24 years and have worked with several hundred local commissions around the state. And I recognize it's not such an easy job all the time. It is a challenging work that you do, but just so very important. So thank you for what you do for each of your cities and towns and communities across the country. I'm going to start off by asking a question. I didn't put this in a poll, but I just want you to either put it in the chat or kind of just take a moment to think about this. Who was the first historic preservationist? Just going to give you a couple more seconds to think about who the first historic preservationist was, and then I'll move on here. Some of you may know this person right here. Her name's Anne Pamela Cunningham, and she is responsible for basically saving Mount Vernon right here. So Mount Vernon, basically in the mid-19th century, in terrible condition, ready for demolition, home of George Washington. And Anne Pamela Cunningham was responsible for a nationwide campaign, a fundraising campaign to save Mount Vernon. And she was very successful in that. And today, Mount Vernon still remains that museum that she established, and it's still owned and operated by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. So an incredible success story here in terms of preservation from the 19th century. When I've sort of done research, when I was teaching at UMass Amherst, doing research on the history of historic preservation, and I look at sort of the articles and books out there on the history of historic preservation, often the chapter would start with Anne Pamela Cunningham as sort of the founder. But as I thought about it in terms of my role at the State Historic Preservation Office, something actually didn't quite seem right there. So, as I said, I've worked at the State Historic Preservation Office, working with local commissions over 24 years. And not once in my 24 years did I ever give this advice. Buy that historic property, raise funds for its restoration, open the building as a museum. In 24 years, I have never suggested that anyone do that. I usually suggest things like this: community-wide historic preservation planning, community education about historic resources, adaptive reuse of historic resources instead of museums, passing local preservation ordinances, many other things like this. That's what I recommend on a daily basis to all the commissions that I work with, not actually creating more museums. And so that got me thinking, well, then who was first historic preservationist? I started to think broadly. Could it have been someone thousands of years ago? Now, I was watching this documentary a couple years ago on cave paintings. And the cave painting that they were talking about in this certain cave in France were really interesting. So this one cave, as you first enter the cave, had handprints. So you go in and the walls have these really, really simple handprints at the entrance of the cave. Go in a little further into the cave and the images get a little more complex. Some stick figures, things like that. Go deeper into the cave and they get more complex. Stick figures, animals, hunting scenes, all kinds of things like that. Real action taking place. And so what the documentary was basically pointing out was this cave is amazing because you can see the whole evolution of the earliest cave paintings and then the more recent cave paintings as it goes more and more further into the cave. You can see a whole evolution right in one cave. And I thought that is really amazing. But what's really amazing to me is all those populations, those peoples that came in thousands and thousands of years later after those first cave paintings were done, why did they leave them untouched? Why didn't they paint over these early cave paintings like this? Why did they go further into the cave? What made them save these earliest cave paintings there? My question really is, how did they save these cave paintings through the millennia with no historic preservation ordinance in place? I mean, to me, it was done by sort of a collective social sense that we shouldn't touch these early cave paintings. Maybe the elders would tell the younger people in the group, don't touch those early cave paintings. Those were done by our ancestors. Let's go further into the cave. There was a whole educational process here that took place where a regulation wasn't needed. These earliest cave paintings were saved for thousands of years by every group that came in afterwards, simply because there was probably a sense that we shouldn't touch these early cave paintings. And so my historic preservationist counterintuitive reality over many, many years of doing this is that you can do historic preservation with only non-regulatory tools. It's a great way to do historic preservation. You can do historic preservation with regulatory and non-regulatory tools. That's actually the best, having an ordinance and having all kinds of outreach techniques. You can't do historic preservation with only regulatory tools. It does not work. Not effective, sort of a strategy that's really going to doom you to failure. So normally when I do this at camp, I go through 10 historic preservation tools for outreach and community engagement. Since you don't have that much time, we can't do 10, and I'm limiting it to just 3. So if you want to hear the whole presentation, you're going to have camp come to your community instead. All right, well, let's do the 3 here. Number 1, encouraging interest in historic preservation. I'm going to give you a couple of quotes through my presentation of quotes that I have heard over the years. We can't do historic preservation in our town. We don't have any regulations, no ordinance, teeth. What we need are teeth. I say that would be wrong. Encouraging interest is effective and essential. All kinds of things like historic plaque programs, entering historic district signage, local historic preservation award programs, being creative like these amazing historic district seats that are in downtown Philadelphia, all great ways to do outreach, to get people interested and excited about historic resources in their community. We really do need to start them young, though, because this is kind of what we're up against. We're up against Legos here, the Lego City Demolition Starter Set. This is a scene that I just loved in Bethlehem a couple years ago. I loved it because there's kids that are all part of this historic community having the best time, and they're going to remember this. This is going to be a memorable event as they are surrounded by historic resources as well. I just stood there and watched this scene of just how wonderful it was to see this historic area just be overtaken by kids as well. So yes, outreach to me really important. Start it young, thinking about how we get kids actively involved in historic resources. Scavenger hunts, I love those. I love just any kind of coloring books and just getting kids really actively involved as a great way to have a whole lifetime of involvement with historic resources. Marie has a pager handout of ideas that I put together, so she's going to be able to get a link to that for you. But I have a 2-pager of lots of other ideas for encouraging interest, and I think Adrian will give you some more ideas as well. Number 2, working with your political leaders. Here's my next quote, and I'm going to try not to say this so I don't actually swear on this webinar here. When it comes to historic preservation in this city, the city council doesn't give a expletive. The mayor doesn't give an expletive either. My response when I heard this quote was, why should they? Why should the mayor care? Why should the city councilor care? Has the mayor had 10 resident constituent calls in the past 6 months about a preservation concern? The answer was no. Do you present the role of the commission annually at a city council meeting? The answer was no. Do you prepare an annual report that you can send to each councilor? Again, the answer was no on all of those. Then we got to the building that was actually threatened with demolition, and I asked them some questions there as well. Could you get 20 people to show up at a city council meeting to advocate for saving this building? No, I wouldn't be able to get that many people there. What is the population of your city? 20,000 people. So you wouldn't be able to get just 0.1% of the residents of your city to show up at a council meeting? There's been some awkward silence. And then my very gentle and understanding response, this local preservationist, was, why is it surprising that the city council isn't listening to you? This is entirely logical. It is exactly what we would expect if you don't have a vocal preservation constituency. Number 3, improving your relationships in your community. We have no respect in this town. It's like the residents don't even know we exist until someone complains about us. The hysterical committee is out of control. Maybe some of you have heard that before. So, what have you been called lately? I can't see the chat right now, but I'm curious what you're going to put in the chat for here. What kind of names have you been called? Maybe the hysterical committee, maybe self-appointed, self-important, un-American, elitist, arrogant, probably lots of others as well. I'm going to turn this around a little bit, though. How do you view and treat those who don't share your own views? Have you had any good names for those non-preservationists? Some that I've heard. Philistines, graceful, ignorant, money-hungry developers, and so on. Here's my thought on this. When it comes to community engagement, we can disagree on absolutely everything and still be nice to each other. Community engagement doesn't necessarily mean getting everyone to agree with you. Not everyone will. It just means trying to find common ground. All right, I might offend a few of you on some of this, on this next slide here, but I'm going to say it anyway. Something I've noticed over the years, passionate preservationists aren't always the best listeners. Sorry, had to say it. I have noticed this over the years. So what I've noticed is that when we take the my way or the highway approach to things, that's kind of what we end up with as local preservationists.
Chris, just chiming in to give you a 3-minute warning.
3-minute warning. Great. Thanks. All right. Another quote I've heard. Why don't they support us? We are on the side of angels. So question for you. As a preservationist, do you think that you are on the side of angels? I don't know the answer to that because I don't have that kind of inside knowledge, but I do know this. As soon as you think you are on the side of angels, you've automatically put yourself at an automatic disadvantage. There's a wonderful book here by Bill Schmickel called The Politics of Historic Districts. There's some wonderful quotes. This is one of my favorite ones right here. Having the courage of your convictions doesn't mean acting in divine disregard of present realities. So why are we called the Hysterical Committee? I'm going to tell you why we are called the Hysterical Committee. I think we are called the Hysterical Committee because we laugh, have a great sense of humor, and have an all-around spectacular outlook on life. And that is why we are called the Hysterical Committee. And with that, I will finish. And I'll just say that if for some of the other sections that I've included in this presentation at camp, we cover things more on building constituencies and proactive planning and strategic communication, how to communicate democracy, and all kinds of things like that. All right, I'll turn it back to you, Marie.
Thank you, Chris. If anyone has any questions directly for Chris, please put his name right before your question in the Q&A section. And with that, I will hand it over to Adrian.
Great. Can you hear me and can you see the slides?
I can hear you, and I'm sure your slides are on their way. They are loading. I can see them.
Perfect. Okay, I'll go ahead and begin. Thanks, Chris. I think as you'll see, we will be building upon things that we're going to talk about today. Again, I'm Adrian Fine with the Los Angeles Conservancy. This is a little bit of my background. I've worked with commissions in lots of different capacities, both as sitting on a commission. I've been staff to commissions, I've been consultant to commissions, I've been before commissions, and I've been an applicant coming before a commission as well. Both working in the Midwest and then on the East Coast with the National Trust, and then for the past 11 years in Los Angeles on the West Coast. So that's a little bit quick background for me. I'm going to have 2 poll questions. So Marie, if you can go ahead and load this question. It's essentially asking you, what are the primary challenges in terms of people that you're working with and supporting your work as a preservation commissioner or staff member? I'll be talking a lot about audiences that we interact with and how well that works or doesn't work so well. I can't see it, so Maria, if you can let me know if it's up and running.
Sure. We've got about, well, they're starting to come in. It looks like right now the winners, the general public. We've got elected officials. Looks like property owners are taking the lead.
Okay.
Let's see. All right. We've got a majority responding. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and I'll read you the results.
Oh, it's fine. That gives me a sense. Let's just go ahead with the second poll.
Sure.
And so with this one, it's asking you what's one area that you need help with or greater attention to as a preservation commissioner or board or even staff member, from design guidelines to procedures to feel-good preservation activities to media strategies. So I'm curious, what's the leader of this pack?
All right, starting to come in. It looks like updated preservation design guidelines and feel-good preservation activities are neck and neck. Close behind, we have clear, consistent procedures, greater staff support and training, and media, both traditional and social media strategy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate you indulging me, get a better sense of what you're dealing with. So this is what I'm going to cover quickly. Audiences, and like Chris said, tune in for the full show if you want to take part in a camp. But the various audiences that we all work with, but also the reason why does it matter to engage with these folks. So we'll go through a variety of things here. But let's just start with this. This is what most people think you're about. Again, that you're in a back alley, always fighting some property owner or developer, whoever it might be, but that you are the voice of no. You're always saying no to approvals, no to whatever it might be. And so I think one thing, if I leave you with anything, is to start thinking about the work that you do. It's not about saying no or stopping things or freezing things in time. It's about managing change. You manage change. That's all it is. You don't say no necessarily, but you say how and which things happen in your community. So you actually say yes more than no, but that's not what the public thinks about you. So I often think about it and equate it to more like this. As a kind of a period appropriate Tupperware party, you as a preservationist are making a case for why old buildings and places matter in your community. And maybe these period 1970s dressed, attired ladies or your city council member, you're trying to convince them that this is important. And I will say you probably have 4 of the 5 ladies with you here, but the lady on the end of the couch, she's probably not convinced yet. So just think about, how do you build support? And also the understanding is you don't have everybody with you. This is a typical kind of scenario here, a Cultural Heritage Commission in Los Angeles. One side of the room is against an HPOZ, which is a Historic Preservation Overlay Zone, is how they call it in Los Angeles, otherwise known as a historic district. On the other side of the room, you have the people in support. So it's all about how do you bring people together, but also knowing that you're going to always be dealing with inherent conflict and differences of opinion in terms of this. And also that you can't bring everybody together. But it is about how do you be prepared to deal with difficult people, don't get caught off guard, be respectful, and deal with them in a way that is pleasant and kind, but also stand your course in terms of what you're there for. And also understand that it's also about putting out the right information. And there's a lot of propaganda that we deal with as commissioners, as the public, to understand what the facts are when there are conflicting or controversial issues that you're dealing with in your own community around preservation. And I would also say that it's also understanding that there are lots of different people in your community, and it's about meeting people where they are, understanding there's different heritage, different cultures, different language and traditions that you should be respectful for, so that you are connecting with people. And part of everything that I'm talking about today is this basic idea of how do you ensure that you're relevant to the people in your community, so that preservation is seen in that light. And part of it is being relevant to the different people and the diversity within your community. This is ultimately what you're about: stopping demolition, the loss of historic places. But think about what would happen if you guys didn't exist. And this is one way to pitch yourself in terms of your value within your community. You ensure bad things like this don't happen in your community. If you didn't have a commission, these kinds of things could happen. It's also showing how you've supported and enabled good things. So these before and after scenarios happen because you provide a service. You're providing a design review mechanism to show that. You're showing how old buildings can be adaptively reused, take on new lives. Again, you're not stopping things. You're showing how they can occur with preservation. You're also showing, again, how a building can be expanded. Just a simple example of additions to historic buildings. All these examples show how you can expand a historic house, but do it in a way that's compatible. And again, you make that happen. Here's an example, not such a great second-story addition. This didn't go through preservation or design review. This example did. It's a better example about how do you expand an older house and allow it to change, but do it in a way that's more respectful. Again, you manage change. You don't necessarily stop things. Also, you allow for infill, new development. Again, you make sure it fits in with the character, the scale of an older neighborhood. These are some of the core audiences that we're often dealing with. And each one of these, you should think about what's your strategy? How do you develop a relationship with these folks? How do you connect with them? And they're all 6 different strategies in one in terms of dealing with that. One example, and Chris had mentioned this, about doing an annual report. How many of you are actually showcasing what have you accomplished in the past year? In this example from Phoenix, it's showing how many properties they've reviewed, showing their where all their districts are, showing exactly what they have contributed in the past year. It's also showing how many projects they've approved, which the vast majority they have approved that have come in. They haven't denied the majority. Again, it's kind of dealing with that misconception, showing also how many public presentations or outreach they've been doing in the community. It's all about demonstrating your worth and value. And you don't just do an annual report and let it sit on a shelf. You take it to your city council, your town council, and you present it. You let them see what you're contributing in your community. Another example where they're doing a Historic Preservation 101 workshop, and this is also outlined within the report. This is from Grand Rapids. Also showing, again, design review, the befores and afters. So it's very visual in terms of the impact that they're having in their community. Again, looking at how many applicants they've reviewed, how many have been approved, 96%. That's amazing. Doing award programs, again, before and after visuals are really great to showcase what you're doing. The media loves this kind of thing, especially award programs. It always gets in the paper, lots of visuals. So think about ways like that where you can cultivate, again, a relationship with the media here in a very positive, proactive kind of way. Also think about how can you make your elected officials, whether it's your town council or supervisor, whoever it might be, make them look good. Thank them when they do great things. In this case, an unveiling of a historic district sign. They invited the council member who helped make it happen, thanking him. He's part of the celebration. It's very feel good. So look for those opportunities. Look for those opportunities where they can, cut that red ribbon, be part of it. It's good for them and their constituents, but it's also good for you in terms of building a positive relationship in what you do. Chris mentioned this. Make it easy for people to know when they're in a district, where it is, showcase the boundaries, so that you'll always have people that will say, I didn't know I was in the historic district, and they do work that's not permitted. But make it as hard as possible for people to have that argument so it's very clear where are the district boundaries. This is a great example from Maryland where they not only do these monument signs, but they actually did a photo op opportunity with the commission. Everybody's very happy. They're getting their sign. And it's, again, a very positive, feel-good kind of thing in this community that they were able to do. Also think about the design review process. How transparent is that in your community? Do you have signs that are posted that are showing, when a design review proposal is coming before a commission so that people know the process, again, that they understand it, they can participate. It's very clear in terms of that. This is a couple of good examples of working with realtors in your community. One is doing a training program. Another is a realtor that is actually putting out these yard signs in partnership with an older neighborhood, celebrating when they turn 100 years old. So it's a core audience that can really help you when they really get what you're about in terms of the district. And then there's other tools, things like newsletters, tried and true, but they still are really effective in terms of communicating what you're doing, what are the latest landmarks that you've designated, making it really easy to show what you're accomplishing. This one I call the call is coming from inside the house. And this is dealing with the issue of you may have city inspectors, building inspectors, planning people, people at the permit counter that may not totally be the best ambassadors for what you do because they don't really get it. So think about doing, in this case, an annual orientation, inviting those people to come together, explain what you're all about, learn more about how they do their job, but help them do it in a way that they're communicating the value of preservation in a much better way. And this is a process. Do it every year because you'll have turnover of staff, but build those relationships with people inside City Hall. And then think about how do you demystify the process? So make it very clear, step by step. This issue of the paint police, make it very clear whether you do or you don't cover paint, or if you do cover paint, how is that handled? So look for ways to demystify the process. And if you don't have this on your website or have a website, that's one step. Put everything on your website in terms of commission agendas, FAQs, design guidelines, all the kinds of things that people should know about, make it available to them. And then also look at the way to get ahead of myths and misconceptions before they take hold. So go ahead and bust those myths, put them on your website, and help people understand what they're going to hear and what the true answer actually is. And then I'll close a little bit here about the idea of kind of the theater of a commission meeting. Think about how presentable you are to the public. Is it an intimidating process? How do you come across as a professional? Is there side talk? Do people feel intimidated? Do they feel like they're not being heard or respected, especially on the controversial issues that may be coming before your commission? So think about how you're being perceived, or think about if you were in the audience watching your meeting, how well would that be in terms of a positive experience for people? And also think about, it's often now online through Zoom, which is a whole nother experience and much greater audience that's viewing the way in which you do your work. So keep all that in mind, and think about the media also may actually cover your commission meeting for a controversial issue. Again, once it's out in the public, if you've not conducted yourself in kind of a responsible, professional way, it can really backtrack or backfire on you as your commission and what you're doing. And the media can work against you, but often it can work for you. And two good examples here of media articles, and this one's great, although they don't totally get it by asking how much landmarking is too much, so it's a step. And then lastly, I'll end on this slide, is think creatively about what you can be doing in your community to develop outreach and do positive kinds of things. This is an example that I was involved with when I had a lot more fluffy hair, me on the right here, where we actually did a great unveiling project that helped remove the aluminum siding from historic homes. And it was a great kind of partnership with property owners. It's great visibility, media loved it. And it was just another way to engage people and be creative and have some fun with it. And this was our commission that actually took this on itself. So with that, I will end and turn it over to Lauren. Thank you.
Yep. Hello, everybody. Just going to get my screen pulled up. There's a strange wind sound. Okay, so I'm Lauren Hookhamer. I am the Assistant Historic Preservation Officer for City of Tacoma, which is on the ancestral lands of the Puyallup tribe, and I'm going to be talking to you about how to reach your audience. So the first thing is connecting with, what does your audience need? You know, lots of times we come to them as professionals, as commissioners, as planners, and we are trying to give them a message, right? We're trying to say, preserve this, do this to your neighborhood, come to this city meeting, but we're not really connecting with what does our audience need and what's important to them, right? We have to tailor our message to that it's interesting and relevant to their lives, as other speakers said. So something I like to see is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And that sort of says, before you can think about larger, things such as neighborhood history or architectural styles, all of that sort of community-driven stuff, you have to think about, what does the person need? What are their basic needs? If somebody is struggling to meet their housing needs or their job needs or their food needs, they're not going to take time out to go to a landmarks meeting, right? They're not going to take time out to go learn about architectural styles. So it's our job as preservationists to connect what we do to what they need. Preservation is about housing. It is about safe streets, right? It is about creating a safe and good environment for your community. So recently, this has been shaking up my presentation a little bit. I found out that Maslow based his hierarchy on a philosophy from the Blackfoot Nation. And the way they structure it is, first, self-actualization. So that's where all your basic stuff again. And then community actualization, and then cultural perpetuity. And I think that's really relevant to what we do, because we need to bring in the community, right? We need to reach the community, and then we can perpetuate whatever the culture, the history, the story of our place is. So something that's really important to think about is, diversity and equity, and who is your audience and how do they communicate. We did this poll, and the majority of you are white, female, and straight. That means that you should not be talking about Black history. You should not be telling Native stories. You should not be speaking on communities that you are not a part of. But it means that you should be including those voices. And so I have here a graphic: equality, providing everybody the same thing. That does not serve the community, because every community needs different things. Equity is providing everybody with what they need to reach the same goal, right? So every community is not going to be treated the same way. Liberation, removing barriers to participation, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then inclusion is where they actually participate, and that's where we want to get to. So what we were saying is, really go out to your different communities, go to your Asian American groups, go to find out who the tribes are in your area. If you're in the US, almost everywhere, right, is some ancestral tribal land. Bring them into the conversation, let them tell their own stories. Listen to the story that they're telling you, and don't try to edit it. Don't try to make it comfortable for your audience. Some themes that you should be including every time you're talking about history or community, pre-contact, not prehistory, immigrant patterns, development patterns, environmental history, labor history, women's history, LGBTQ history, underrepresented communities. We often get the reputation that we're just talking about mansions, or we're just talking about high style architecture for rich people in a certain neighborhood. And that's not really what we're trying to do. We're trying to protect the power of place, protect the places that represent the stories of who we are. So we need to recognize barriers to engagement, right? Income levels. Like I said, if you're working full time, or you're working in the night, you can't come to community events that are in the evening. So in Tacoma, we try to make all of our events free, so people don't have to worry about that. Transportation. We do all of our events in different neighborhoods so that people don't have to travel across the city, right? Take time, get on a bus, whatever. Time. This is something I think that is a real barrier, because we like to do our commission meetings, in the evenings, and we often do them during the weekday, and people have work and they have school. So that's really hard for them, to participate. Sometimes they have childcare issues. So what we often do is we do events in the evenings, and we do them on the weekends so that people can have a variety of times that they can participate. We're also thinking more about accessibility. A lot of times our really cool historic buildings are not ADA accessible. So how can you get around that, right? Maybe you can take photos, maybe you can do videos instead, so that people can still experience what you're talking about, but not have to have those struggles. Feelings of exclusion and disenfranchisement. That is something I think is hard to understand if you are not from one of the communities that is disenfranchised, right? But I think you have to really go to that community, talk to them, and understand where they're coming from. There is a reason that many communities and people of color do not trust the government, right? They don't trust these authority figures. And I think if we look at the history of the Black community, if we look at the history of the Native American community, it's pretty obvious there what's going on. Another barrier can be language. Try to provide translation services where possible. Really respect local knowledge, right? So that's what I'm saying. Go to your local experts. Go to the people who are out there doing the work in the community and elevate what they're doing, right? Listen to what they're saying. Taking that, go connect with your Asian Pacific Cultural Center, your Black community, your Native community, the oral history. And I'm going to play a video which the Puyallup tribe made here, and it's for their land acknowledgement.
Ati duf ati swatwiftud atish poyalapaj, a slasasil, altidisha tu alturi tuha.
It is the land right here that the Puyallup people have lived on since the beginning.
Deshav tidfa chas alti swatwiftud.
This right here is where we are in the world, our homelands.
Uyayus chas ati swatwiftud atish tu ishachas. Ukachachas tis badadachas. Uoch twati chalalt ati swatwiftud atis poyalapaj.
We work on our ancestral lands. We raise our children who go to school on the land of the Puyallup people.
Ohegwad chas ti shwananam tliti, ohashitav ti pas pasted okweredu.
We acknowledge that the Medicine Creek Treaty was signed for the whites to take our land for their benefit. Ohashitav chas ati shwananam tliti ati swatwiftud chas. Otsut ti pas pasted squat lup swatwiftud lup.
Land was assigned to our people. The Caucasians said, "This is your land," and they took that land from us too.
Okadaritab chas atiswa twiftud chas. Odzak atab tis pliti.
Our land was stolen from us. Treaties were broken.
Toch didich chas a atislachel.
But we are still here today.
Hui chasa tu kwelin, chasa tu ish, chasa tu alalos, chasa tu tol shot sidam.
Our people forage for food and materials, we pick berries, we canoe, we practice our traditional ways, and we speak Twelshutsi.
Just as our ancestors did.
Hoya chas.
We are finished.
All right, so I played that video because it's really important to acknowledge people the way they want to be acknowledged, in their language, in their culture, with their own stories, their own voices, and not the way we want to acknowledge them. And I think sometimes that's very difficult because we think of ourselves as the experts, right? Or as having done their research, the work, but we really need to do that to get people to feel comfortable participating. When we are asking people to participate, right, when we're asking them to landmark, we're really asking them to do something for us, right? We are in some ways taking information from them, taking time for them. And what we really need to do is be giving back. So make sure that you are putting in the time to build that relationship and not just so that you can take, right, or get information. So this, we'll be giving more examples later on, but this is a quick example of an art interpretation project that we did for Tacoma. And we hired artists from all the different communities, some Asian American communities, Native American communities, different communities, right, in the city to create the artworks, right? And then we paid them to do that. And then we created a program for young Native American artists to be mentored while the expert Native American artists were creating the art, right? So we're giving back to the community, investing in it, and showing them that we have a real dedication, that we're not just trying to grab some information or check off that equity box real quick. So leveraging community partners. And by that, I don't really mean using people, but really connecting with the groups that are already doing the work in those neighborhoods. There are already nonprofits. There are already community experts and community leaders who are doing work in the communities that you want to reach. Connect with those people, right? Have them introduce you to people in those neighborhoods, right? Have them tell you how the neighborhood wants to be treated, how they want to be reached, right? Some neighborhoods, some people like to be reached by email. Sometimes you need to go door to door, right? And so these are just some quick examples of community events where we've worked with community groups to put on an event or to reach a common goal. The last picture is the Nettie Asbury House, and that's a picture of Dr. Nettie Asbury. She is the first African-American woman to have a PhD in music. Some say on the West Coast, possibly in America, hard to verify, but her home is in Tacoma. And what we did was we pulled together a bunch of community groups to preserve this. We have Forterra, they're a land trust organization because the city does not have a PDA. Forterra is going to negotiate the purchase of this property from the owner and then negotiate the transfer of this property to the Tacoma Colored Women's Club so that they can create an African American cultural center in this neighborhood. Now, that's not something the city could accomplish on its own, right? So it was really important to build those relationships with the community, right? Build and put the right people together. It doesn't have to be all your own work or all reinventing the wheel. There are experts out there who know what they're doing. And so that is what I have for this part. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lauren. We're right on schedule. So now we will move into the second portion of this panel where each presenter will go into a case study. So Chris will be going first. So Chris, whenever you're ready. And I will also take this time to note while he's setting up that I have added his handout, the 2-pager to the handouts tab. We're working on trying to get it to be downloadable, but I also posted a link to it in the chat. So be on the lookout for that. I'll post it again.
All right, we ready, Marie? Hear me okay?
I can hear you, and now I can see your presentation. So you're good to go.
Excellent, great. All right, so I'm going to do a success story here where I felt there was a real success in terms of community outreach and engagement. And this is a building here in Springfield, Massachusetts. It's the Willys Overland building, which I'll talk a little bit more about background on that in a minute. So this is a building from the early 20th century. It had gone through a number of places where it just really slowly gone into a decline, definitely underutilized over the past few decades, somewhat occupied, but certainly underutilized. That was up until about 10-ish years ago when there was a gas explosion and leveled several buildings nearby and severely damaged this building. Actually had structural damage on this building. So then after that, the building was completely vacant for a number of years until then the owner came in and said, I'm going to demolish this building for more parking. So that was the context of what happened next. I'm just going to go back for a little bit of history on this building because I have a special interest in the Willys vehicles, so I'll mention that as well. So this is the Willys Overland building from 1916, and they made vehicles. They also went on to make Jeeps that were really responsible for success in World War II. So this building didn't actually manufacture any vehicles here, but it was a showroom, and I think they did some repairs here on this building as well. So this right here is my dream vehicle in high school. I worked on a Christmas tree farm when I was in high school, and this was the farm vehicle. I thought this was the most amazing vehicle ever. I really wanted to get one. So that was in the 1980s. That was my dream vehicle in high school. My other dream vehicle in high school was this, the Stanley Steamer. It ran on steam. I mean, I just thought that was the best thing ever. So those are my two dream vehicles right there. Everyone else in my entire high school, this is their dream vehicle right here, the Camaro Z28. So you can kind of get a sense. I went into historic preservation, and I was a different kind of kid. Okay, well, we'll move on here. Okay, so here is the building today. This is just opened up a few months ago. It was adaptively reused for largely loft apartments on the upper floors. They are going to have some retail down below as well, but the building is very successful and really filling up as well. So a huge success for Springfield. Now I should also mention Springfield, not exactly a hot real estate market by any means. So to really see this building take off like this was really amazing. But it took a number of steps, I think. And that goes back a long ways. So here we have back in 1983 when this building was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So National Register, largely an honorary designation, and yet it really was very helpful in advocating for this building. So it had a number of advantages by having it listed on the National Register, which I'll mention in a minute. So really, in terms of this preservation success here, it goes back decades like this to getting this first listed on the National Register. Next thing that happened was that there's an ordinance in the city of Springfield, the demolition delay ordinance. So that means when something comes in for demolition, they had a 9-month waiting period. And so the delay was approved by the Springfield Historical Commission. And so that meant the owner could not demolish for 9 months. After that, as soon as that 9 months is up, owner could go ahead and do the demolition. But at least they had a little bit of waiting room, waiting time there to think about some other options. So it also happened that there was a plan in place. There was a downtown revitalization plan already been prepared, and so this building was identified. This area was identified as key to the area's revitalization. So that really had a lot of buy-in in terms of City Hall, local elected officials. They were already keen to see this area being revitalized and knew that this building did have some real importance there. They have a nonprofit organization in Springfield, the Springfield Preservation Trust. So this nonprofit or advocacy organization already had a substantial membership, and they were ready to move within that 9-month demolition delay period to quickly move for the next steps. So they did a campaign to all of their members, and lots of social media, lots of phone calls, big campaign to try to convince the city council to figure out a way to permanently protect this building. And their option there was a local historic district ordinance. So here they had the ability to establish a single building local historic district on this building. And if they did that, if they established a single building local historic district, that would mean that the building would not be just a delay, the building would be permanently prevented from demolition. So they were, because of this very citywide substantial advocacy campaign, as well as having that revitalization plan in place already, they were able to get the Springfield City Council to approve a single building local historic district there. Other places around the country might call those local landmarks, but we call them single building local historic districts here in Massachusetts. So they did that, and the building could then no longer be demolished. Of course, that wasn't going to really save the building. I mean, you couldn't demolish it, but it was going to sit there derelict unless there was somebody that was going to come forward with the ability to really find an adaptive reuse for this building. And that's where the state and federal tax credits came in as well. And that goes right back again to the National Register listing from 1983. Because it was already on the National Register, the state tax credits were particularly available to the new owner of this. So the building was sold. The new owner came in and successfully applied for state and federal tax credits. And with that financial ability there, was able to do a conversion to loft apartments. So a wonderful success here for this building, and one of my favorite successes, I think, just because it really takes so many of these tools that we talk about all the time in terms of having an advocacy campaign, in terms of the National Register, in terms of having a preservation ordinance, in terms of outreach to their local elected officials, and then using all the other kinds of tools like tax credits that are out there as well. Okay, I will turn it back to you, Marie.
I want to give you a 5-minute warning.
Oh, okay. Yep, I'm all done.
Oh, great timing you have. Okay. Well, with that, we will move on to Adrian's case study.
Okay, Marie, just let me know when you can see the screen.
Will do. And sorry, Chris, I just turned your camera and mic off. All right, Adrian, I can see your slides just fine.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Lauren. And welcome. Nice to see you back, or see myself back, whatever I'm trying to say. So I'm just going to share kind of a case study about this idea, and it's actually come up in some of the questions I've noticed in terms of how do commissions form private-public partnerships with their local preservation nonprofit organizations, if they exist, and hopefully they do, and share how that's worked specifically in Los Angeles, but what I am sharing here could translate to any size community, and just take what you can from that in terms of how you might apply it to your own community. But I will just say that I've always worked in the nonprofit sector, and I've always worked with commissions in lots of different capacities, but they can be incredibly helpful when you have those partnerships, because there are things that nonprofits can do that you as commissioners cannot, in terms of especially, number one, being an advocate. But there are ways to work and form partnerships which can be very beneficial in terms of the work that they do, including tours and programming and things like that, which may not be in the wheelhouse necessarily of a commission, although you can do it. But it's great when you can partner with a nonprofit, and also doing things like workshops. We're doing, in this case, Phoenix has a separate nonprofit that is the Phoenix Historic District Coalition. So there's lots of great things when the nonprofit partners with the city and the commission to do kind of programming and getting the information out there in terms of outreach. It's going to be really effective. And from the advocacy side, this is really where it's really important in terms of things like around budget or staffing. Two examples from Philadelphia and DC, or Philadelphia and Los Angeles, where both cases, the city was cutting the budget for the preservation program. And you as commissioners can't be an advocate, but you can help inform the nonprofit and let them know what's going on so that the nonprofit can go into action and try to advocate to get within the budget, the funding restored, or to increase the funding, whatever it might be in terms of that. And that's really critical to support the work that you're doing in a local government. So I'm just going to share from Los Angeles. We have a strong partnership with the Los Angeles City Planning, specifically with the Office of Historic Resources and the Cultural Heritage Commission. They do lots of great work on their own. It was, their ordinance goes back to 1962, so it's a pretty early one. 35 historic districts. They've done a citywide survey, and they've done a series of these historic contexts around women's heritage, Latinx, LGBTQI, Jewish heritage, whatever it might be. Which is really great in terms of the work that's happening within the city in terms of programming, but it's also how do you translate that to the broader public? This is one of the things that we do in partnership is a Los Angeles Historic Neighborhoods Conference. We try to do this on an annual basis, but it doesn't always work that way, where we address some cutting, difficult issues that we're dealing with in throughout the neighborhoods. But it's a true partnership between the nonprofit and the preservation program, the Cultural Heritage Commission. And it's got traditional kinds of things in terms of trainings, windows, how to, properly tuck point your building, all those kinds of things. But it's also looking at ways to engage people in their neighborhood. So this was an effort that we called #LAStoryhood, in terms of people sharing and celebrating their neighborhoods and loving the places in which they live. It's a feel-good kind of thing, and people love taking part in this and kind of showcasing their neighborhoods. We did this as an Instagram campaign, so it's one thing to ask, like, do you have the ability to do social media as a commission? If not, figure out how you can do that in partnership with your local nonprofit or historical society, whatever may exist in your own community in terms of doing that. The LA Storyhood was something we just asked people out in the community, share what you love about your community. No rules, doesn't have to be a capital H historic landmark. People love House of Pies or graffiti signs or Dodger Stadium. It's all fine. Just share what connects with you in your own community. And then at the conference, the Neighborhoods Conference, we asked people to vote on their favorites. It was just kind of a feel-good kind of thing, both social media as well as in-person kinds of ways to engage people around this, again, in partnership. And this is something that we're doing at the Los Angeles Conservancy, a boot camp where we're training people, advocates, neighborhood residents about preservation, but we're specifically training them about how do you do landmark nominations? How do you go about getting your neighborhood listed as an historic district? So we're doing a lot of that behind the scenes work and capacity building that will then help the local preservation commission so they have better applications coming to them and greater success in terms of people supporting. This is another area where the work that we are doing as a nonprofit is beneficial to the Preservation Commission, where we did a recent study looking at the economic benefits of historic district designation, looking at issues of affordable housing, gentrification, displacement, being able to have concrete data and analysis that backs up what until recently was very anecdotal in terms of what we thought the benefits of being in a historic district were in Los Angeles. So again, a partnership in many ways between the local preservation program and the nonprofit. This is another ongoing effort where we're looking at legacy businesses, so more of the intangible heritage of the community. In terms of, we have an initiative looking at this, but we're also pressing the city of Los Angeles to create an official program within the preservation program that would recognize legacy businesses and hopefully at some point create incentive programs for them. Again, we're launching it and building the base for that, and then we're prodding the city to create an official program. So again, it's a true partnership in terms of that. And sometimes the city does programming that then we have the ability to be much more flexible and nimble and innovative in some ways to take it further. So the city created a context statement looking at LGBT history. We then launched an initiative looking at LGBTQ history around historic places in LA, doing the short videos and films and engagement, all kinds of programming. And that is increasingly lending itself to more designations as local landmarks that are recognizing places for their cultural heritage, not necessarily architectural heritage, but it's, again, expanding the base. And again, the whole idea of telling the full story. We need to tell the cultural heritage of our places. This is another example where we actually initially launched a program looking at modern architecture in LA. The city then did a context statement looking at late modern. That has then launched to this whole initiative and broader work talking about modernism, talking about places more from the recent past, 60s, 70s places, in terms of the work that the city's doing and the Preservation Commission and what we're doing, which has then launched a whole nother initiative that we did last year looking at the 1970s turning 50 years of age. And I know not everyone's ready or has even started thinking about the 1970s being historic, but it's time. Chris showed pictures of cars. I've got cars too for a different purpose, with this idea that cars are more readily accepted as being historic earlier than historic buildings. But here in Pennsylvania, a 1984 Chevy Chevette is now historic. So we may not be at the 1980s yet, but we need to start be looking at the 1970s because they're now coming of age. places like this, which is a designated historic landmark in West Hollywood. And also understanding it's much of the story of preservation was happening in the 1970s, including our tax credit programs, and adaptive reuse was really coming of age during this era. And I would just ask of you, and think about it, ask what the 1970s mean to you, and ask of what that means to people in your community. It's another form of engagement. It's a tool to get people start thinking about these places. All of your communities have it, and thinking not just about the architecture, but what was happening in terms of pioneering women in architecture in the 1970s, and also what was happening then, what's happening now. And it goes back to this issue of relevance and the work that we do. And I'll leave on this point about this idea of asking the question of why old places matter. If you haven't read either of these books, they're great. I certainly encourage it. And it's asking this question about, is it because of memory? Is it because of beauty? Is it because of creativity, learning, sustainability, whatever it is? What's your why? Why do you care about these places? And for me, it's often about connection. These places connect us to our past, but it's another great tool to answer it for yourself, but to also use this to ask within your community and your constituents as a preservation commission about why people care about these places, and find creative, innovative ways to do that, and partner with your nonprofit if you can do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Adrian. I love that question. What is your why? All right, and then we are going to move on to Lauren. And while she's setting up, I just want to draw your attention to the handout section. Lauren's slides are now available there. So thank you, Lauren, and working on the rest if they're available. And Chris's might be a little harder to share since they have animations, but I'll see what I can do, everyone.
All right, hello again. So in my day job, I both staff the Landmarks Commission and manage our education outreach program. And so when I was hired, they really wanted to create an audience that was more diverse and younger than the traditional preservation and heritage community. And so one thing that I make a strong effort to do is to never say historic preservation, planning, and use jargon that the general public doesn't understand, right? Especially when we're trying to work with kids. So here's an example of a youth program that we ran for a few years that was really successful. And it's a poetry slam contest where we had youth talk about what is important to them in their communities. So I'm gonna switch to the video.
Can you guys hear me in the back? Yeah. All right, guys, I'm gonna do my poem. It's called Life Around Here. When I lost faith, I lost self. Who am I? This week I inhaled a stranger's resist I because I do what I gotta do to get by, even if inside I have to deny the truth.
The idea for the Poetry Slam in Hilltop came about as part of the Preservation Month in May, and we were approached by the city's preservation office to put on an event that highlighted some of the historical and, I guess, present aspects of the Hilltop neighborhood, using youth poetry as a kind of vehicle for that.
A big kid pushed between towers of muscle. Middle school was hell, high school even worse. No way to hide the weight, it became a curse. He didn't go. So
a poetry slam generally is a poetry competition where you have 5 judges who rate poems between 0 and 10. We ask 5 people who generally don't need to know anything about poetry. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, it doesn't really matter. The idea is that whatever they find interesting about the poem is what they ascribe the score to.
This is the way I feel. No one can tell you the way I feel. So numb, but these stories are so real. In this life you spin your wheel. So real, so real.
Because it's representing Historic Preservation Month, for me, as I was working on this, I really was thinking about a lot of the community that's kind of being erased from the Hilltop right now. There's a big boom in our economy. We have a lot of new people moving in and some gentrification happening. And because of that, there are a lot of other community members that are leaving, a lot of businesses that are closing down while others open up.
I'd like to welcome the rest of the world to my block. A block where between the hours of sunrise and sunfall, we play dodgeball with gunshots. See, on this block, you can become a lost soul for standing in the wrong spot.
Part of it, for me, was also about hearing the stories that young people might say about the streets that they grew up on, the streets that they remember, and not just preserving what's here, but also preserving what was a part of the past and what's gone now.
With everything that my family's gone through, I don't know who to be happy for, me or them or everything or everyone, and it's hard to be happy for everyone when everything is changing.
I felt moved. I just felt really excited to see as many poets as we had standing up there, feeling confident, and once they got into it, it just kind of took over. Surprised also, you know, you never know what you're going to hear, and there is a lot of variation, a lot of depth. Overall, just completely moved and excited for the future.
But I was really, really impressed with the quality of the work, and I think I wasn't the only one. I think there were other people in that space who were really moved by at least one of the poems that they heard. And I know myself by many of them, and I was really stoked at the end. I thought the kids were really on point. Yeah, really solid poets.
I promise you that you will lose yourself before you ever lose the weight. And you will be weighed down by the beauty that you think you will gain. And I want to shake you, to make you see the error of your ways. But I'm afraid that if I do, I will break you.
What we like to say at the City of Destiny Poetry Slams at Louder Than a Bomb, and generally in youth slams, is that the point is not the point is the poetry, because we don't want to overemphasize a competition, because we don't really think that poets competing against one another is that interesting. It's really kind of dumb, frankly, but like the idea of getting people into the room together is really the goal. So we emphasize over and over again that the competition doesn't matter. And yeah, there are prizes, but I don't think anyone really left that evening feeling bad that they lost. I think everybody left that night feeling really glad that they came, and I think that's important.
Live and learn, it's a lesson taught. Through the stress you caused me my buttons and you pressed them hard. Never thought I
So for the sake of time, I'm going to switch to another example. And this was actually inspired by the Los Angeles Conservancy's last remaining seats, because that was my first preservation internship. And I just loved how film really connects with the community. So let me switch there.
Well, H.C. Weaver was an independent movie producer who had the great idea of making independent films in Tacoma, Washington during the 20s. Once the studio was built on this 5-acre parcel at Titlow Beach Road, 1600 Titlow Beach Road, as a matter of fact, there was also some adjoining bungalows built. The hotel that was across the street, which we call the Lodge now at Titlow Beach, was actually a hotel at that time. It was like capitalization. Okay, let's capitalize on this film studio being here. And they actually drew up a plan, and we have some drawings of that, of Hollywood by the Sea. And it was no doubt going to be envisioned as the Northwest Hollywood. And why wouldn't it be, right?
Silent film was a rage. There were many other cities in the United States that were also looking to start up a film production studios. And Tacoma was unique in that they had a successful one.
Talking to local historians and museums, they said that Tacoma had a film studio in the 1920s down by Titlow Beach that filmed 3 films, and they were all lost since the 1920s. And a lot of research had been done, but no one had ever been able to track them down. So I started researching under the director's name and found out that Eyes of the Totem still existed at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City.
We now think that probably 1 out of maybe 10 of the thousands of silent films that were made actually survive and are viewable today. So when something like this comes along, where it's discovered that a fragment or some bit and you can view it again, it really is something to celebrate. And then when the extraordinary thing happens and you have the opportunity to see an entire feature film, to see the entire work of the artist of their day, it really is amazing. There was a core of people in the community that are already one way or another involved either in history or involved in film as an art form. And so the Team Tacoma, the group that have kind of been working on this, is sort of a balance between historians, kind of academic historians, and then people from our film community and our film history community.
Films at the time were hand cranked. The cameras were hand cranked, and as a result, anytime a film was made, there would be a variation in speed, not only because of who was cranking it, but also how they were being directed and told what to do. So as a result, there's a lot of variation in silent film in terms of frame rate. And when we watched the film the first time, a number of us were a bit concerned about the frame rate that we saw it being displayed, which was at 24 frames per second. Since we're the ones showing the film, we're kind of like the projectionist of old. We have the opportunity to slow the projector down or speed it up because the film's in our hands and we're showing it, and the director's not here to tell us what speed. So we came to the conclusion that this film was probably best viewed at about 19 frames per second, which is, I think, what the cameraman probably cranked it at.
The main restoration, it should be noted, is more of a musical restoration. So it's more about finding a time code to set in place. So
All right, and I see that Marie posted the links in the chat so you can finish those videos. But basically, we restored this historic film that was filmed in the 1920s in downtown Tacoma. And then we took Tacoma back to the 20s and showed the film in the historic theater where it first premiered. And we packed the house about 3 nights in a row, thousands of people. And they were just so excited to see the history of their city and so excited to see there's that connection, and there were tears in the eyes of the old historians. And I think that was so powerful because it really connected why history is important, why Tacoma is unique, and why we do what we do. So that was just one example. I do about 20 events a year, and I do everything from bike tours, walking tours, video tours, talks, trainings, trivia nights. And so it really hits a large demographic of people, right? Some events are social media based, some are youth based, some are more for the architecture community, and some are for the general public, like you just saw with the poetry and the film. And that just gets people, in the door thinking about what does the city mean to me and why is important and why do we do preservation? Because architecture is cool, but at the beginning, at the end of the day, why we preserve is because these places mean something to our community and they say something about who we are. That is all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris, Adrian, and Lauren. I am going to start the Q&A. So we have until 2:30. Please take a look at the handouts, and then I will also share a link to the Dropbox folder while the presenters are answering their questions. The Dropbox folder will also have their presentation slides if you're having issues downloading. So I'm going to start with the first question. Let's see, they got the most votes, but just so you all know, you can also look in the answered section as some of them have already been answered. So I guess I'll start with the ones that have not yet been answered. This question is for Lauren and Chris. We often struggle with our lack of incentives, and this is from Cade W. Sterling. Hopefully I said that right. We often struggle with our lack of incentives for residential property owners. However, the same owners are often the most affluent members of our community. Are incentives even appropriate for this group of people? Without them, it's hard to get buy-in for the district and associated resource management tools, but with them, it looks like you're giving incentives to a population that doesn't necessarily need them. So Lauren and Chris, whoever wants to jump in first.
Do you want to go ahead, Lauren?
Sure. So in Tacoma, we have the special tax valuation program, and that is to support rehab in any of our landmarked or districted properties. So that includes residential. Anybody who has a registered home can apply for it. It does often happen that it's the more affluent neighborhoods as well. We don't have, I think, a good way to incentivize people who are not yet wanting to put things on the register. And I think that's something we really struggle with. But it usually doesn't come down to incentives. It really comes down to them understanding why and what to certain communities putting things on a register is very scary, and giving government control of the property, whether or not that's actually what's happening, is what's the barrier.
Okay. Yeah, I think you bring up some really good points, and I certainly see that here in my home state, but certainly is common in other areas in terms of incentives preservation incentives heading more towards those that are well-to-do. And of course, as preservationists, not something that we particularly need, because we kind of get that elitist view anyway. I would say, though, I don't think we are alone in terms of other kinds of tax credits, incentives that are out there, retirement kinds of things. I mean, all these things often are benefiting the more well-to-do. I mean, it's not just a preservation issue, I would think. I think it's more of just a tax structure, a larger tax structure that we have that's unbalanced. I mean, one thing I would say that we do have at our hands here in Massachusetts is something called the Community Preservation Act, and that's been really useful, a really useful fundraising technique at the local level. So it's basically raising everyone's taxes a little bit, and then what's raised locally can be used for preservation, open space preservation, and workforce housing, affordable housing kinds of things. And we really do have some wonderful successes in terms of how that program really has benefited a broader, diverse population. Yeah, I wish at the national level we had some more things that I could recommend.
All right, thank you, Chris. We have another new question for you. Chris, it's from Amber Askew, I believe. Chris, can you speak to the best differentiation of activities for government HPCs versus nonprofit advocacy groups? Are awards appropriate for a group that makes final decisions for permitting appropriate, for instance?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I would much rather see an awards program be done by a private nonprofit organization than the actual organization that's doing any regulatory reviews. I mean, that's the ideal, but certainly I have seen it work in terms of a local preservation commission handing out the awards as well. But I really like that differentiation, so that there's a real clear boundary there in terms of recognizing property owners that didn't necessarily have to go through that process of the regulatory process of the local historic district commission. Was there another part of that question? Was it just on the preservation awards, or is it just sort of recognizing the distinction between the two in general? Is it in the Q&A here?
In the answer section. So if you want
there
to
it is.
check that.
Okay.
Can I jump in there for a second too? So we at Tacoma, the city gives out preservation awards, and they are awarded by the Landmarks Commission, but we recognize projects that both went through the design review, but then also projects like legacy businesses, heritage programming, and things that we don't regulate. And the reaction has been really, really great. And I think people feel like then the commission really appreciates what the community is doing and really sees what they're doing and is not just there to regulate, but also to recognize and award.
Lauren, I love that idea of the legacy business and making preservation awards not just about appropriate design review. That sounds like a really great idea.
All right, thank you both. And we have another question from Cade for the group. Any advice on how to best channel Recovery Act funds toward preservation-based economic development and merchant district revitalization, such as tying allocation of funds to new landmark or legacy business designations?
I can take a stab at that. It's a good question and not an easy question. But yeah, from the recovery piece, the issue in terms of like legacy businesses, we've actually been looking at that from the standpoint of job creation, small business, mom and pop operations, but also from an equity standpoint. That a lot of these places are serving communities in really critical ways. So that corner market that may be a mom and pop shop is really a lifeline for a lot of neighborhoods and also a cultural touchstone. And figuring out ways to access and recovery funds from an economic development standpoint and job creation is a sort of a backdoor way to also fulfill preservation or heritage conservation, whatever you call it, in terms of your community. So that's one approach that certainly we and I know other communities are looking at.
Does anyone else have anything to say about that question?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Okay, we had a question come in from Carlos D. Ruiz. How one engages minorities when historic resources might be limited in a community representing them. I think that's for the group, but maybe for Lauren specifically.
Yeah, I can start with that. A lot of times minority communities and communities of color have lost their resources because we haven't valued them in the past because they're not high style, they don't look fancy, they're not a famous architect, they're more vernacular, and they may lack that integrity. So sometimes the goal, I think, is not only to landmark more things, but to recognize these communities. So like I said, bringing in speakers from these neighborhoods that can talk about why their history is important. Sometimes you can recognize things that are lost already, right? Not through traditional design review and landmarking, but just through recognition, right? Getting the word out there, giving voices to those who have been silenced, putting up markers or signs, doing programming. And then something we're all struggling with is that question of integrity. And so shifting away from just the architectural significance, but even changing our codes, right? So that integrity isn't a threshold, and finding a new way to landmark or recognize these properties. So for example, maybe no design review, but only demo review. Maybe it's just an honorary legacy business. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. And I think the main way, though, is to connect with that community and see how do they want to be recognized and why.
I would just add to all great points from Lauren and totally accurate as well. It's asking the community what they want and learning from them about what is important. But it's also kind of shifting the way we do preservation. And this issue of integrity has been something that has traditionally tripped us up in terms of being a gatekeeper or a barrier for allowing some places of cultural significance to enter the preservation arena. In Los Angeles, integrity is not a factor for designation, although it's often interpreted as such. And we've done things like with the Chicano moratorium march of the late 60s and 70s, which has lost a lot of like traditional architectural fabric. It was important for the community to have it recognized nationally. And so we worked over a period of 5 years to have that listed on the National Register, and it pushes boundaries of integrity in extreme ways in terms of a building that's been changed very much, but it still tells the story. And then we most recently did this with, or working with this right now, on a building that's important for women's heritage arts of the 1970s, 60s, 70s, with a building that's also been changed a lot, but it was really important for it to be designated as a local landmark, and it's on its way to becoming that. So it's often shifting the way we look at preservation or traditional approaches to doing it, so that it is recognizing and allowing more stories to be told. And if it's designation, that's one approach, or interpretation, it's being open to lots of options.
Thank you, Adrian. Okay, so we are now at 2:30, and I know we've had a lot of great questions come in. Many of them have been answered in the answered section. So we don't have a whole lot of time. I'll try to make more time next time. But please do not hesitate to reach out to Chris, Adrian, and Lauren. Their email addresses are on the handout in the handout section. You can also find Chris's handout in there as well. And then I just posted a link in the chat to all of their presentation slides, and I will do that again really quick. So you should be able to see all of their presentations now. I also want to just give everyone a reminder that we have another free webinar coming up on Thursday, May 27th. And that's dedicated to brutalist and postmodernist architecture. So don't forget to register for that. I can go ahead and give you a little information there. It'll come out at the bottom of your screen, so you can register that way. And if you are a member of NAPC, we plan on doing these webinars regularly moving forward. So look out for those. If you're not a member, we encourage you to register, or sorry, not register, join NAPC. And I will slide out an offer for that as well. It's the neat thing about this platform. But thank you all for joining us today and for all of the interaction. We really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye. And Sean, I think you can go ahead and end it. We're good to go. Thank you.
Are we still live?
I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording. And Sean, whenever you can just end this. I feel like we're like on dead air on the news.